Welcome to the Music Artist Deep Dive Podcast.
Imagine you have exactly 2 years to completely change the trajectory of modern music. Not decades, not this long, sprawling career filled with reinventions. Just 24 months.
Right, which is just a blip, really.
Exactly. 24 months to invent a genre, lay down the rules for every band that comes after you, and leave a legacy that will literally outlive you by generations.
It's not an impossible task.
It really does. But today, we are taking a massive stack of biographical and historical sources to piece together one of the most compressed and impactful timelines in cultural history.
Oh, absolutely.
We are diving into the life of Charles Hardin Holly, better known as Buddy Holly, and our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how a bespectacled kid from Texas who tragically died at just 22 managed to lay the foundational blueprint for the modern rock band. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, well, it is an incredibly compressed timeline. I mean, his professional career as a national recording artist was barely 24 months long.
Which is wild.
It is. Yet the innovations he pioneered during that tiny window, they are still the absolute standard today. We are talking about how bands are physically structured.
Right.
How they manipulate sound in a recording studio, what they look like, and fundamentally, who gets to write the songs. If you want to understand the architecture of modern music, you have to dissect those 2 years.
You really do. And to understand the sheer velocity of those 2 years, we need to look at where he started. Because, he wasn't born a leather-clad rebel with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth.
Not at all.
No, he was born in Lubbock, Texas, right during the Great Depression. The youngest of 4 kids in a very traditional, deeply musical family. I mean, everyone played an instrument or sang, except his dad.
Right. They were a very tight-knit musical bunch.
Yeah, and there is this fantastic anecdote in the sources about his older brothers, Larry and Travis. They were competing in a local talent show, and little Buddy, who was just a toddler at the time, insisted on joining them on stage with a toy violin.
A violin he absolutely did not know how to play, by the way.
Exactly. So to prevent him from ruining their act, his brother Larry actually took the time to heavily grease Buddy's violin bow.
That is so smart.
Right. That way, Buddy could saw away at the strings with all the enthusiasm in the world, and it wouldn't make a single sound to throw off their harmony.
He was basically on mute.
Yes. They ended up winning the contest, with Buddy completely oblivious to the fact that nobody could hear him.
It paints a vivid picture of how immersed he was in live performance from the very beginning.
Mhm.
I mean, he later switched to guitar after seeing a classmate play one on the school bus.
Yeah.
And you might assume that in 1950s conservative Texas, his parents would push back against a secular music career. But his parents were astonishingly supportive.
Which is so rare for that era.
Completely. They actually bought his first acoustic guitar from a pawn shop. His mother even penned a letter to the editor of the local Lubbock newspaper, actively defending rock and roll teenagers.
Wait, really? His mom defended rock and roll in the paper?
Yeah, right after teenagers were criticized in this rather pearl-clutching conservative editorial, she just stepped right in to defend them.
That level of family support is incredible. But, even with parents who had his back, you don't invent a rebellious new art form without a little bit of internal friction.
Oh, for sure.
My favorite detail from his youth happens when a preacher at the local Tabernacle Baptist Church walked up to a young Buddy and asked a classic Sunday school question. He said, "What would you do if you had $10?
A very standard youth pastor question.
Exactly. And Buddy just mutters, "If I had $10, I wouldn't be here."
Wow. Yeah, that spark of restlessness was always simmering right under the surface. On the outside, he was listening to traditional country music, artists like Hank Williams and Bill Monroe.
The polite stuff.
Right. But under the cover of darkness, he was engaging in a totally different kind of education. He and his friend Sonny Curtis would sit in Buddy's car late at night, just turning the radio dial to catch distant, high-powered stations.
Oh, because the signals carry further at night.
Exactly. They could only be picked up when the atmosphere cooled down after dark. So they were pulling in late-night rhythm and blues broadcasts from stations hundreds of miles away.
It is amazing to picture him literally pulling these different cultural signals out of the night sky. He is taking the country and Western structure of his childhood and mentally splicing it with the driving, heavy beat of the blues.
Yeah, that synthesis is key.
But the real turning point, the moment all that theory turns into practice, arrives in 1955. Buddy has been gigging locally, and he gets booked to open for a new touring artist named Elvis Presley at the Fair Park Coliseum in Lubbock.
What's fascinating here is how immediate the impact was on his psyche. His bandmate Sonny Curtis noted that after seeing Elvis, Buddy fell entirely under the spell of that sound.
I mean, who wouldn't?
Right. The very next day, they became, in Curtis's own words, Elvis clones. Holly saw the visceral energy of the crowd. He heard the definitive shift from polite country to aggressive rock and roll, and he just pivoted his entire musical direction overnight.
It feels akin to a local startup completely changing its business model the morning after watching a massive tech giant drop a keynote presentation. They just saw the future and decided to build it.
That is a great way to put it.
But there is a huge, glaring irony here. Buddy Holly did not have Elvis's incendiary, threatening sex appeal.
No, not at all.
He is standing up on stage in a bow tie, wearing thick glasses, looking more like the polite kid who bags your groceries than a dangerous rock star.
And that visual contrast forces an entirely different approach to the music.
Yeah.
Elvis was selling an attitude, a physical presence that mesmerized audiences.
Right.
Holly absorbed the attitude, but because he couldn't rely on that hip-swiveling charisma, he had to focus entirely on the mechanics of the sound and the craftsmanship of the songwriting.
The actual music had to do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. And that meticulously crafted sound eventually caught the attention of a Nashville talent scout, which led to his first major contract with Decca Records. But this is where the traditional industry machine tries to completely crush his vision.
Yeah, so imagine you finally land your absolute dream job at a massive, prestigious company, only to find out your new boss won't let you use any of your own ideas. A total nightmare. And to make it worse, if you try to quit, you are legally banned from working in your industry for 5 years. That is the exact trap Decca Records locked Buddy into.
It was brutal.
He goes to Nashville in 1956. The producer there, Owen Bradley, was famous for churning out highly orchestrated country hits for stars like Patsy Cline.
Very polished stuff.
Right. Bradley runs an assembly line. He selects the session musicians, he dictates the arrangements, and he gives Buddy zero creative control over his own art.
Because the Nashville system was built on efficiency, not innovation.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do with Holly's hybrid rock sound, so they tried to force him into a traditional country mold.
Which obviously didn't work.
Naturally, the singles they release flatline. They go absolutely nowhere. Decca drops them in January 1957, but they enforce a standard industry trap, which was a 5-year non-compete clause for the songs he recorded. Yeah, the label technically owned the artist's output, meaning he could not legally record those same songs for anyone else.
He must have been incredibly frustrated, but he was totally driven. He knows the sound he wants is in his head. He just needs a space where he is allowed to execute it.
Right.
So he takes his band to Clovis, New Mexico to work with an independent producer named Norman Petty. Holly has now taken over lead guitar duties himself, and they decide to record a new demo of a song they had previously attempted back in Nashville, a track called That'll Be the Day.
And the origin of that title perfectly captures the cultural osmosis of the time. Buddy and his friends had gone to the local movie theater to see the 1956 John Wayne film, The Searchers.
Oh, classic.
Yeah, and throughout the movie, John Wayne's character repeatedly uses the cynical catchphrase, "That'll be the day." It's stuck in their heads, and they built a song around the cadence of that line.
That is so cool.
So they lay it down in Clovis. But they immediately run into that massive legal wall we talked about. Decca says Buddy Holly is legally prohibited from releasing it.
Okay, wait. Looking at these sources, I'm actually conflicted about Norman Petty's role in what happens next.
How so?
On the one hand, Petty engineers this brilliant subversive trick to sneak them past the corporate gatekeepers. Drummer Jerry Allison suggests they create a fake band named The Crickets.
Right.
So they send the demo off to Brunswick Records in New York under this pseudonym, completely dodging the Decca contract. Was Petty acting as a genius manager protecting the band's art? Or was he already setting up a confusing financial web that would trap them?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to realize that artists in the 1950s had almost zero leverage. They had to be deeply subversive just to claim ownership of their own sound.
That makes sense.
So Brunswick loves the demo and releases it exactly as it was recorded in Clovis, preserving that raw, independent energy. Then, in a twist of corporate irony, Petty and Holly discover that Brunswick is actually a subsidiary of Decca.
Oh, you have got to be kidding me.
No, it's true. And since Decca technically owned the new release anyway, it legally cleared Buddy to start recording under his own name again for yet another subsidiary. Coral Records.
which leads to an incredibly complex manipulation of radio DJs. Petty starts releasing Cricket's records on the Brunswick label and Buddy Holly solo records on the Coral label simultaneously.
It was so sneaky.
It really was. He understood the mechanics of radio play. He knew DJs had strict rules about not overplaying a single artist. But by splitting the releases across two different label names, the DJs didn't realize they were putting the same guy on heavy rotation. It is a masterclass in guerrilla marketing.
It was so effective that even Buddy himself seemed confused by the dual identity in interviews. But to your earlier hesitation about Petty, that skepticism is entirely warranted.
Okay, so I was right to be suspicious.
Oh, absolutely. Petty provided the isolated studio space in Clovis, which allowed them to experiment without a ticking clock, but he was simultaneously building a financial trap. He began inserting his own name into the songwriting credits of tracks he didn't write.
Ugh, that is awful.
And he funneled their incoming royalties into his own company's accounts.
So he was a gatekeeper acting as a savior. That financial chokehold is going to become brutally important later on. But in the short term, that freedom in the Clovis studio leads directly to some of the most important breakthroughs in music history.
Right.
That'll be the day skyrockets to #1. They hit the road. And in August 1957, they are booked to play the Apollo Theater in Harlem. They arrive, and the promoters are stunned to realize they've booked a white act. They're the first white band to ever perform there.
And the Apollo crowd was notoriously demanding. When the Crickets first stepped out, the audience was entirely unimpressed.
I can only imagine the tension.
It was high. But Holly didn't retreat. They launched into a blistering cover of a song by Bo Diddley, leaning heavily into that driving rhythm and blues influence. They won the crowd over through sheer musical competence, proving that this new sound could completely transcend racial lines.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just the live shows. It is what he is doing back in the studio. We often hear that Buddy Holly pioneered the modern rock band lineup. 2 guitars, a bass, and a drum kit.
Yes.
If you think about it, he essentially invented the basic HTML of a rock band.
Let's explore why that specific arrangement was so revolutionary. Because before Holly, popular bands relied on massive horn sections, upright pianos, and a dozen different musicians.
Big bands, basically.
Exactly. That required expensive instruments, complicated travel logistics, and importantly, trained musicians who could read complex sheet music.
Exactly. It was a huge barrier to entry. But if we take that HTML analogy further, Holly's setup is a streamlined code. The drums and the bass provide the hidden structural back end of the music.
I like this analogy.
Thanks.
Yeah.
The rhythm guitar acts as the visible text holding the chords together, and the lead guitar is the CSS, the styling, the flair, the solos laid over the top. By proving you could make a massive radio-ready sound with just 4 guys, he made rock music completely accessible.
You really just needed a garage.
Yes. You didn't need to read sheet music, you just needed to memorize a few chords in a garage.
Yeah.
Every band from the Beatles to Nirvana to whoever's practicing down the street today is still booting up that exact same code.
He democratized the creation of rock music, and he was equally innovative with recording technology. He was one of the very first artists to heavily experiment with double tracking his vocals.
How did that work back then?
Well, mechanically, this meant recording a vocal take on magnetic tape and then singing along perfectly with that playback while recording onto a second machine.
Wow.
Yeah, it created a chorusing effect that thickened his voice, compensating for what he felt was a thin, natural tone.
So he was producing his own records before the concept of a self-producing artist even existed. And he also revolutionized the aesthetic. During a trip to New York, the Everly Brothers pull him aside, take him shopping for sharper Ivy League clothes, and tell him to ditch his old-fashioned wire-rimmed glasses.
Which is such a funny detail.
Right. So Buddy goes back to his Lubbock optometrist and deliberately selects a pair of heavy, black, horn-rimmed glasses made in Mexico.
He takes what was traditionally viewed as a symbol of geekiness and weaponizes it. Those Buddy Holly glasses became an instant teenage trend.
Everyone wanted them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He leaned into the fact that he didn't look like a traditional star, and by owning it so completely, he redefined what cool looked like.
This entire New York era is just a whirlwind of cultural elevation. In June 1958, he is visiting a music publisher's office, and he spots the receptionist, Maria Elena Santiago.
Right.
He asks her out to lunch, then immediately follows up by asking her to dinner at P.J. Clark's. On their very first date, he hands her a red rose. When she looks inside the petals, there is a ring. He proposes on the spot.
It is incredibly romantic. She accepts, and they are married less than 2 months later.
Just moving so fast.
Very fast. Buddy and Maria Elena move into an apartment in Greenwich Village, and he begins soaking up the high art culture of New York City. He isn't satisfied with playing three-chord rockabilly for the rest of his life.
He wants more.
He really does. He is actively planning collaborations with soul pioneer Ray Charles and gospel legend Mahalia Jackson. He even starts taking acting classes at Lee Strasberg's famous Actors Studio.
You can hear this immense ambition in his final studio sessions in October 1958, often referred to as the String Sessions. He goes into the Pythian Temple studio to record 4 songs, including True Love Ways.
A beautiful track.
Yeah, but he doesn't just bring his guitar. He brings an 18-piece orchestra made up of former NBC symphony musicians. He is dramatically pushing the boundaries of what rock and roll can sound like, aiming for a cinematic longevity.
But expanding that artistic vision came with a massive, crushing price tag. Behind the scenes, the financial reality of his arrangement with Norman Petty was catching up with him.
Here is where the trap snaps shut.
Exactly. Buddy realizes Petty is withholding almost all of his royalties. Buddy hires a tough New York lawyer to untangle the mess. However, due to a separate, complicated lawsuit with a New York promoter, Buddy's available funds are entirely frozen by New York state law.
Which makes the transition to the tragedy so deeply frustrating. It isn't some grand cinematic downfall. Buddy splits with Petty and the Crickets because the band actually wants to stay in New Mexico and keep Petty as their manager.
Which had to hurt.
Definitely. So Buddy is isolated in New York. Maria Elena is pregnant. The rent is due. The royalties are locked in litigation. He is quite literally broke. To survive, he is forced to accept a slot on a grueling winter tour just to generate immediate cash.
The 1959 Winter Dance Party Tour. It is remembered as a logistical nightmare of epic proportions.
It sounds horrific.
It really was. The promoters booked the dates with absolutely no regard for the geographic distances between venues. The musicians are zigzagging randomly across the frozen Midwest in repurposed school buses with broken heating systems enduring sub-zero temperatures.
On a school bus.
Yes. It was so brutally cold inside the bus that Holly's new drummer, Carl Bunch, had to be hospitalized for severe frostbite on his toes.
Looking at the timeline here, the sheer lack of glamour is startling. We are culturally conditioned to think of rock stars dying from excess, reckless driving, substance abuse, living too fast.
And rock and roll mythos.
Right. But Buddy Holly didn't charter that tiny 4-seat plane out of diva behavior. He chartered it simply because he had run out of clean underwear. He was freezing, exhausted, and he just wanted to fly ahead to Moorhead, Minnesota, so he could find a laundromat and sleep in a warm bed before the next gig. I mean, he died because of laundry.
It strips away all the mythos and leaves you with a deeply sobering reality. And the cascading series of coincidences that put those specific passengers on that plane is haunting.
So haunting.
Buddy's guitarist, Tommy Alsop, famously flips a coin with Richie Valens for a seat. Valens calls heads, wins the spot, and reportedly jokes that it is the first time he has ever won anything in his life.
Unbelievable. And Waylon Jennings, who Buddy had hired to play bass for the tour, voluntarily gives up his seat to J.P. Richardson, known as the Big Bopper, because Richardson had a terrible case of the flu and physically couldn't handle another night on the freezing bus.
The flight took off shortly after 1 a.m. on February 3, 1959, into a blinding snowstorm. The young pilot, Roger Peterson, was not fully certified to fly by instruments alone in zero visibility weather.
A recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. According to Buddy's brother Larry, who later reviewed the aeronautics investigation, the plane was equipped with a newly installed Sperry gyroscope.
Okay.
The artificial horizon on this specific model presented pitch and roll exactly backward compared to the older instruments Peterson was trained on. In the dark and the snow, the pilot likely misread the gyroscope, pushing the nose down when he thought he was pulling up, driving the aircraft straight into the ground.
The plane crashed into a cornfield just 5 miles outside Clear Lake, Iowa. Everyone on board died instantly. Buddy Holly was only 22 years old.
This raises an important question about the human toll, the immediate ripple effects that often get paved over by the legend.
Yeah, the real human cost.
Exactly. Maria Elena, his wife of barely 6 months, found out about his death while watching television in their New York apartment. The shock and trauma were so severe that she suffered a miscarriage the following day.
That is just awful.
And because of the specific cruelty of how she found out, government authorities actually changed their protocols. They implemented a strict policy against announcing the names of accident victims in the media until families had been properly and privately notified. That standard procedure exists today because of Maria Elena's heartbreak.
It is a devastating detail. And culturally, that crash became universally known as the day the music died, a phrase forever cemented by Don McLean's song American Pie.
Sure.
But if you look at the historical sources, the music didn't die in that cornfield at all. The cultural butterfly effect of Buddy Holly was really just starting to take flight.
His influence on the next generation is almost impossible to overstate. Consider Bob Dylan. Just 3 days before the crash, a 17-year-old Bob Dylan attended Holly's performance in Duluth, Minnesota. Dylan later wrote about how he stood just 3 feet away from the stage, they locked eyes, and Dylan genuinely felt that Holly's spirit transferred to him.
Meanwhile, across the ocean, teenagers John Lennon and Paul McCartney saw Buddy perform on a British television broadcast. They were mesmerized by the fact that he was writing his own material.
It was a revelation for them.
It totally was. They started studying his records, realizing that a band could be a self-contained creative unit rather than just singing songs written by professional composers. They even chose the name The Beatles as a direct insect-themed homage to the Crickets. The impact was so profound that Paul McCartney eventually purchased Buddy Holly's entire publishing catalog to protect it.
And you look at Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. Richards has stated explicitly that he modeled his early rhythm guitar playing on Holly's aggressive percussive style, specifically on the track, Not Fade Away.
I can hear it now that you say it.
Right. The Rolling Stones recorded a cover of that exact song, and it became their very first top 10 single in the UK in 1964. The foundational code that Buddy Holly wrote in those 2 years was utilized by the biggest bands in history to build massive empires.
Even his personal artifacts took on a mythic quality. Those iconic, heavy black glasses were initially presumed lost in the wreckage.
They were missing for a long time.
Decades, actually. They were discovered in the spring of 1959 after the Midwestern snow finally melted. The county coroner placed them in a manila envelope along with the Big Bopper's watch, filed them away in a courthouse storage room, and they were completely forgotten.
Just sitting in an envelope.
Just sitting there. It wasn't until a local sheriff stumbled across the envelope in 1980 that they were recovered. They now sit on display in a museum in his hometown of Lubbock.
If we synthesize everything we've explored today, from the greasy violin bow to the Apollo Theater to the tragic end in Iowa, Buddy Holly proved something profoundly radical.
What?
He proved you did not have to be a manufactured idol to be a rock star. You could be a nerdy, pigeon-toed guy with thick glasses.
Yeah.
But if you possess the drive to write your own songs, the curiosity to produce your own tracks, and the vision to arrange your own band, you could absolutely conquer the world. He forever shifted rock and roll from a purely performance-based art form into a true writer's medium.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? I want you to think about what you can build, create, or change in your own life over the next 2 years. We often trick ourselves into thinking we need decades to make a meaningful mark.
We always think we have more time.
Right. But Charles Hardin Holly is the ultimate proof of how much can be achieved and how a foundation can be laid that fundamentally changes the world in just 24 short months.
It serves as a powerful reminder of what intense, focused, and uncompromised creativity can yield when you refuse to wait for permission.
And I want to leave you with one final, deeply ironic thought from the source material to ponder on your own. In 1957, right as his career was catching fire, a Canadian DJ named Red Robinson interviewed Buddy Holly.
Okay.
Robinson asked him a simple, seemingly casual question. Did he think rock and roll music would still be around after 6 or 7 months? And Buddy Holly, the guy who had literally just written the operating system for the future of music, replied, "I rather doubt it."
Oh.
The man who sincerely doubted the genre's survival ended up being the very architect of its immortality. Just keep that beautiful irony in mind the next time you are trying to figure out what you can accomplish with the time you have. Maybe your 2 years starts today. Let's get to work.